The afternoon sun filtered through the heavy clouds that had gathered over a small suburban town in Kansas. The sound of cars rushing down Highway 77 was a steady hum in the background, accompanied by the occasional chirp of birds seeking shelter in the thick trees lining the roadside. It was the kind of late summer day when the air was thick with moisture and a storm seemed inevitable. Among the noise of passing traffic, a sudden and sharp screech of tires pierced the air, followed by a loud, guttural thump. A small blur of orange and white was sent flying from a sleek black sedan speeding down the highway. It landed with a sickening thud in the overgrown grass on the shoulder of the road. A moment of stillness followed, as if the world itself had paused to acknowledge what had just happened. For a second, it seemed like the little creature was lifeless, another casualty of human carelessness. But then, a faint, pitiful meow emerged from the grass, a cry so weak it could barely be heard over the noise of the cars. The kitten's eyes flickered open, its tiny chest rising and falling unevenly. It was just a few months old, a fragile life that had barely begun. At that very moment, fate intervened in the form of a young woman named Hannah Jacobs. Hannah was a veterinary technician who lived in the outskirts of the town. She had taken the day off work, hoping to spend a quiet afternoon catching up on reading at a nearby park. Instead, she found herself standing frozen by the roadside, watching the horrifying scene unfold. Hannah's heart clenched. She had been walking along the shoulder, her car parked a few hundred yards away after a flat tire had left her stranded. She saw the kitten tumble through the air like a discarded piece of trash, the tiny body limp and broken in the grass. Without thinking, she ran toward it, dodging a passing car that honked angrily at her. When she reached the kitten, tears welled in her eyes. Its fur was matted with blood, one of its legs twisted at an unnatural angle. The little thing trembled as it tried to lift its head, its emerald green eyes meeting Hannah's for the briefest of moments before it collapsed again. "Hey, it's okay, I've got you," Hannah whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. She carefully scooped the kitten into her arms, wrapping it in her cardigan to keep it warm. Its tiny body felt alarmingly light, as if it were made of nothing but fur and fragile bones. Hannah rushed back to her car, forgetting about her flat tire. She frantically called her best friend, Mark, a local mechanic who lived nearby. Mark wasn't just a skilled mechanic, he was also an animal lover with a soft spot for strays. "Mark, I need your help. It's an emergency," she said, her voice trembling. Within minutes, Mark arrived, his tow truck pulling up beside her. He took one look at Hannah's tear-streaked face and the bundle in her arms and knew this was no ordinary roadside emergency. Together, they rushed to the veterinary clinic where Hannah worked. As they sped toward the clinic, Hannah couldn't stop thinking about the cruelty of what she had witnessed. Who could do something so heartless? How could anyone look at such a helpless creature and see something disposable? Her anger was matched only by her determination to save the kitten, no matter what it took. The veterinary clinic was a small but well-equipped facility nestled in the heart of town. Dr. Emily Grant, the head veterinarian, was already waiting at the door when they arrived. "Let's get it inside," she said briskly, leading them into the examination room. The next few hours were a blur of activity. X-rays revealed multiple fractures in the kitten's left hind leg and 2 broken ribs. It had also suffered a severe head trauma, leaving its future uncertain. The team worked tirelessly, stabilizing the kitten with fluids and pain medication. Despite its injuries, the little creature clung to life with a tenacity that amazed everyone in the room. Hannah stayed by its side the entire time, whispering soft words of encouragement. She decided to name the kitten Phoenix, after the mythical bird that rises from its own ashes. To her, the name was a promise, a declaration that this tiny battered soul would rise again, no matter how grim the odds seemed. The first night was critical. Phoenix's survival hung by a thread, and Hannah refused to leave the clinic. She sat by the small cage where the kitten lay, her heart breaking every time it let out a weak, pained cry. She couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind. The car speeding away, the kitten being flung from the window like trash. As the hours dragged on, Hannah made a silent vow. If Phoenix survived, she would make sure he had the life he deserved, a life full of love, warmth, and safety. But deep down, She couldn't ignore the fear gnawing at her. What if his injuries were too severe? What if he didn't make it through the night? The storm that had been brewing all afternoon finally broke around midnight, heavy rain pounding against the clinic windows. As lightning lit up the room, Hannah glanced at Phoenix. For the first time since she had found him, he seemed to be resting peacefully. His tiny chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and she allowed herself a glimmer of hope. Phoenix's story was just beginning, but Hannah knew one thing for certain. This little kitten had already changed her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the lingering clouds, Phoenix was still alive. It was a small miracle, but his battle was far from over. Hannah had barely slept, staying by his side as much as she could. Dr. Emily gave an update during the morning rounds. He's stable, but just barely. The leg will need surgery, and the ribs will take time to heal. The head trauma will have to watch closely. There's a chance he could lose his vision, or worse, develop seizures. Hannah's heart sank. The path ahead for Phoenix was steep and uncertain, but giving up wasn't an option. She looked at the fragile kitten, now hooked up to IVs and barely able to lift his head. "We'll do whatever it takes," she said firmly, her voice filled with a resolve she didn't quite feel yet. The cost of Phoenix's care quickly became a concern. Hannah's salary as a veterinary technician was modest at best, and the kind of specialized surgery Phoenix required wasn't cheap. She and Dr. Emily discussed options, but every solution came with a price tag that seemed impossible to cover. Hannah knew she couldn't ask the clinic to shoulder the burden entirely. It wasn't fair to the business or the other animals they cared for. That evening, after her shift, Hannah sat in her small apartment, scrolling through her phone with Phoenix curled up in a makeshift bed beside her. He let out a faint meow every now and then, a sound that tugged at her heartstrings. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to raise the funds. Crowdfunding? A bake sale? She was desperate for answers. Then, an idea struck her. She opened her laptop and created a post on social media. She described Phoenix's story in vivid detail, sharing photos of the battered kitten from the moment she had found him to his current state. Thrown from a moving car, but still fighting for his life, the post began. "Phoenix deserves a second chance. Any help would mean the world." She included a link to a crowdfunding page she had hastily set up and hit post before she could second-guess herself. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, her post had been shared hundreds of times. Donations started trickling in, each one accompanied by messages of encouragement from strangers who were touched by Phoenix's story. "Thank you for saving him," one person wrote. "He's lucky to have you." Another message read, "I can't believe people can be so cruel. Keep fighting, little Phoenix." But not everyone was supportive. Among the messages of hope and kindness, there were also comments that stung. "Why spend so much money on one cat when there are so many others in need?" one person wrote. "Maybe it would have been kinder to put him down," another said. Hannah tried to ignore the negativity, but the words burrowed into her mind, feeding her doubts. Was she being selfish? Was it wrong to fight so hard for one tiny life when the world was full of suffering animals? Despite the mixed reactions, the fundraiser gained momentum. Local news outlets picked up the story after one of Hannah's friends reached out to them. "Kitten thrown from car finds guardian angel," the headline read. A camera crew even came to the clinic to film a segment about Phoenix. As Hannah spoke to the reporter, cradling the kitten in her arms, tears welled in her eyes. "He didn't ask for this," she said. "All he wants is a chance to live, and I'm going to make sure he gets it." The increased attention brought in more donations, and within a week, they had enough to cover the cost of Phoenix's surgery. The outpouring of support lifted Hannah's spirits, but the journey was far from over. The surgery was risky, and there was no guarantee Phoenix would come out of it unscathed. The day of the operation arrived, and Hannah was a bundle of nerves. She sat in the waiting room with Mark, who had become her rock throughout this ordeal. "He's tougher than he looks," Mark said, trying to reassure her. "He's got the spirit of a fighter." Hannah nodded, clutching Phoenix's favorite blanket in her hands. She had taken to carrying it everywhere, finding comfort in its soft texture and the faint scent of the kitten. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like an eternity. When Dr. Emily finally emerged from the operating room, her expression was unreadable. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," she said. "We managed to set the leg and repair some of the damage to his ribs. He's waking up now, but the next 48 hours will be critical. If there's any swelling in his brain, we could lose him." Hannah let out a shaky breath, a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. She was allowed to see Phoenix briefly, and the sight of him broke her heart all over again. He was swaddled in bandages, his tiny body hooked up to monitors and IVs. But when she leaned down to whisper his name, his ears twitched ever so slightly. It was a small sign, but it was enough to reignite her hope. The next few days were an emotional roller coaster. Phoenix had moments of improvement, lifting his head to eat or letting out a soft purr when Hannah stroked his fur. But there were also setbacks, periods when his breathing became irregular or when he seemed too weak to respond. Hannah barely left the clinic, splitting her time between work and sitting by Phoenix's side. Through it all, she couldn't stop thinking about the person who had thrown him from the car. She imagined their face, their cold indifference as they discarded him like garbage. The thought filled her with anger, but it also fueled her determination. Phoenix would survive. He would thrive. And in doing so, he would prove that love and compassion could triumph over cruelty. As the days turned into weeks, Phoenix began to show signs of true recovery. His leg was still in a cast, and he moved awkwardly, but the spark in his green eyes was undeniable. He started purring louder, meowing more insistently for attention. He was still fragile, but his spirit was unmistakably strong. Hannah knew the fight wasn't over. Phoenix had a long road ahead: physical therapy, regular checkups, and the lingering possibility of complications from his injuries. But for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that he might actually have the happy life she had promised him. 3 months after the horrific day Phoenix was thrown from a moving car, his life had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. He was no longer the battered, fragile kitten lying on the brink of death. Though his recovery had been slow and arduous, every tiny victory felt monumental. His emerald eyes were now alert and lively, and his once shattered leg had healed enough for him to hobble around on his own. Hannah had officially adopted Phoenix, though the truth was that she had belonged to him from the moment their eyes met on that roadside. The bond they shared was unlike anything she had ever experienced. He followed her everywhere, curling up beside her when she sat down, nuzzling her face when she leaned in close. He seemed to sense the depth of her love for him, and he gave it back tenfold. But despite the progress, one thing still haunted Hannah. The person who had hurt Phoenix was still out there. Every time she looked at him, she was reminded of the cruelty he had endured and the countless other animals who might not have been so lucky. Her desire to find justice for Phoenix simmered beneath the surface, growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as she sat on her couch scrolling through her social media feed, a notification popped up on her phone. Someone had sent her a direct message in response to Phoenix's story. She opened it, her heart racing as she read the message. "Hi, I saw your post about the kitten you rescued. I think I know who threw him from the car." Hannah froze. She read the message again, her breath catching in her throat. The sender had attached a blurry photo of a black sedan that matched the description of the car she had seen that day. Beneath the photo was a caption: "This guy's been seen dumping animals near the highway before. He lives on the edge of town." A mixture of anger and adrenaline coursed through Hannah's veins. For months, she had tried to focus on Phoenix's recovery, pushing thoughts of the person responsible to the back of her mind. But now, with this information in hand, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She forwarded the message to the local authorities, attaching the photo and recounting everything she had witnessed that day. A few days later, she received a call from Officer Daniels, a kind-faced man who had taken a special interest in Phoenix's case after seeing the story on the news. "We've identified the car," he said. "The owner has a history of animal cruelty complaints, but no charges have ever stuck. Your statement, along with the evidence we've gathered, might finally change that." The news sent a ripple of relief through Hannah, but it also reignited the anger she had tried to suppress. This wasn't just about Phoenix anymore. It was about every animal that had suffered at the hands of someone who saw them as disposable. She agreed to testify if needed, her resolve stronger than ever. Meanwhile, life with Phoenix continued to blossom. His physical therapy sessions had become a weekly routine, and though he still walked with a slight limp, his determination to play, jump, and explore never wavered. One particularly sunny afternoon, as Hannah watched him chase a feather toy across the living room, she felt a swell of pride and awe. He had come so far, defying every grim prognosis. But the turning point in their journey came one fateful morning when Hannah received a call from Dr. Emily. "I just got the results of Phoenix's latest x-rays," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "His leg has healed beautifully, and there's no sign of lasting damage from the head trauma. He's a miracle, Hannah. You gave him that." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. For months, she had carried the weight of uncertainty, fearing that Phoenix might never fully recover. Hearing those words lifted a burden she hadn't realized she was still carrying. She hung up the phone and immediately scooped Phoenix into her arms, spinning him around as he purred in confusion. "You did it, Phoenix," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're unstoppable." That same week, Hannah received another piece of life-changing news. The authorities had arrested the man suspected of throwing Phoenix from the car. Officer Daniels called to inform her that the suspect had been charged with animal cruelty, thanks in large part to her testimony and the evidence she had provided. The news sent shockwaves through the community. Phoenix's story, already well known thanks to the fundraiser and news coverage, became a rallying cry for stronger animal cruelty laws. People from all over the town and even beyond reached out to Hannah, offering their support and sharing their own stories of rescued animals. But the most surprising moment came when Hannah received an invitation to speak at a local animal welfare event. The organizers wanted her to share Phoenix's story as an example of resilience and the impact of compassion. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't used to public speaking, and the idea of standing in front of a crowd made her stomach churn. But when she looked at Phoenix, now sprawled out on her bed with a contented purr, she knew she couldn't say no. The day of the event arrived, and Hannah stood nervously behind the stage, clutching Phoenix's blanket for comfort. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, Phoenix cradled in her arms. The room fell silent as she began to speak. 3 months ago, this little guy was thrown from a moving car, she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. He was broken, battered, and barely alive, but he fought. He fought harder than I've ever seen anyone fight, and he taught me what it means to truly never give up. She went on to talk about the outpouring of support Phoenix had received, the people who had rallied around him, and the lessons she had learned along the way. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As the audience rose to their feet in applause, Hannah looked down at Phoenix, who was now awake and staring up at her with those bright green eyes. In that moment, she realized that Phoenix wasn't just a survivor. He was a symbol of hope, proof that even in the face of cruelty, kindness could prevail. Hannah's speech at the animal welfare event marked the beginning of a ripple effect that neither she nor Phoenix could have imagined. Phoenix, the once broken kitten, had become more than just a survivor. He was a beacon of hope, an emblem of resilience, and a catalyst for change in their small Kansas town. The response to their story was overwhelming. Donations poured into the local animal shelter in Phoenix's honor, enough to renovate their outdated facilities and start a new emergency rescue program for abused and abandoned animals. Local businesses chipped in as well, offering supplies, food, and volunteer hours. It seemed like everyone wanted to be part of what they had started, a movement built around the belief that every life, no matter how small or broken, deserved a chance. But the most heartwarming change came from the people who reached out to Hannah directly. Messages flooded her inbox, stories of other animals who had been rescued, people who had decided to adopt rather than shop for pets, and even individuals who admitted that Phoenix's story had inspired them to be kinder, not just to animals, but to everyone around them. One day, Hannah received an unexpected call from Officer Daniels. "There's been an update on the case," he said. The man who hurt Phoenix has been convicted. He'll serve time and pay a significant fine. But what's even more important is that this case has sparked a push for stricter animal cruelty laws in the state. It's gaining traction, and I think it's because of Phoenix. Hannah felt a surge of pride and relief. Justice had been served, not just for Phoenix, but for every animal that had ever suffered at the hands of someone cruel. She hung up the phone and turned to Phoenix, who was lounging on the windowsill, basking in a patch of sunlight. "You did it," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "You changed everything." Life with Phoenix settled into a new rhythm. His once daily vet visits became weekly, then monthly, until Dr. Emily finally declared him completely recovered. His leg would always have a slight limp, but it didn't slow him down. He darted around the apartment with the energy of a kitten who had just discovered the joy of being alive. He had even developed a playful habit of hiding behind furniture and leaping out to surprise Hannah, his tail swishing with delight whenever she laughed. The day Phoenix took his first unassisted leap onto the couch was a milestone that left Hannah cheering and snapping photos like a proud parent. He landed with a wobbly but triumphant stance, his green eyes gleaming with determination. "Look at you, buddy," Hannah exclaimed, scooping him up and showering him with kisses. "You're unstoppable." The bond between them deepened with each passing day. Phoenix seemed to sense when Hannah was feeling overwhelmed or tired, curling up beside her and purring until her worries melted away. In return, Hannah gave him a life filled with love, safety, and more toys than he knew what to do with. But the greatest gift she gave him was the freedom to simply be a cat, a creature who had once been discarded like trash but was now cherished beyond measure. The story of Phoenix's recovery continued to spread, eventually catching the attention of a national animal rights organization. They invited Hannah to share Phoenix's story at their annual gala in New York City, an opportunity she never could have imagined. The thought of traveling to such a big city with Phoenix was daunting, but Hannah knew it was a chance to make an even bigger impact. The journey to New York was an adventure in itself. Phoenix, equipped with a special travel carrier and a tiny bow tie, Hannah couldn't resist buying, took it all in stride. He charmed every person they met along the way, airport staff, fellow travelers, even the cab driver who took them to the gala venue. By the time they arrived, Hannah was nervous, but Phoenix seemed completely at ease, perched in her arms like he owned the world. When Hannah took the stage that evening, Phoenix nestled in her arms. She felt a wave of calm wash over her. This wasn't about her. It was about him and the message he carried. She spoke about his journey, the lessons he had taught her, and the power of compassion to change lives. The audience hung on her every word, and by the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. After the gala, the organization presented Hannah with an award for her dedication to animal welfare. But to her, the real reward was seeing Phoenix thriving, his once dull fur now shining under the bright lights. He had gone from a discarded kitten to a symbol of hope and resilience, and Hannah couldn't have been prouder. Back in Kansas, life returned to its familiar rhythm, but things had undeniably changed. Phoenix had become a local celebrity, and people often stopped Hannah on the street to ask about him or share their own stories of rescue and redemption. She didn't mind the attention. It gave her a chance to spread awareness and encourage others to act with kindness. One particularly memorable day, a young boy approached Hannah outside the grocery store, clutching a shoebox. "Miss Hannah," he said shyly, "I found this kitten, and I didn't know what to do. But then I remembered Phoenix, and I thought maybe you could help." Hannah knelt down, peeking into the box to see a tiny, scruffy gray kitten staring up at her. Her heart melted. "You did the right thing," she said, smiling at the boy. "Let's get this little one checked out." She couldn't help but think that Phoenix's story had come full circle. His journey had inspired others to save lives, just as she had saved his. As the weeks turned into months, Phoenix's limp became less noticeable, and his playful antics grew even more endearing. He had a favorite spot on the windowsill where he would spend hours watching the world go by, his tail flicking lazily. Hannah often joined him, sipping her coffee and marveling at how far they had come. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Hannah stroked Phoenix's soft fur and whispered, You changed my life, you know that?" Phoenix responded with a contented purr, pressing his head against her hand. It was as if he understood, as if he knew that their lives had been intertwined by fate for a reason. Phoenix's story had started with cruelty and heartbreak, but it had blossomed into something beautiful. Together, they had overcome the odds, proving that even in the face of unimaginable pain, love could heal, hope could endure, and second chances could lead to extraordinary things. The story of Phoenix became more than a tale of rescue. It became a legacy. His journey from the brink of death to a life of love and joy touched countless hearts, inspiring a wave of change that reached far beyond the small Kansas town where it had all begun. Hannah often marveled at how one tiny kitten, so close to being lost forever, had managed to spark something so profound. Sitting on her porch one quiet evening, with Phoenix curled up in her lap, Hannah reflected on everything they had been through. The fear and pain of that day on the highway felt like a lifetime ago, replaced by the overwhelming gratitude she felt every time she looked at him. His purrs filled the air, a gentle reminder of his resilience and the unbreakable bond they shared. "Phoenix," she whispered, her fingers running through his soft fur, "you're a miracle. You remind me every day that no matter how dark things get, there's always a reason to hope." Phoenix blinked up at her, his green eyes glowing in the fading sunlight, as if to say he understood. He had faced the worst of humanity and survived, not because he was strong, but because someone had seen his worth when others hadn't. His story was a testament to the power of compassion and the difference one act of kindness could make. The town, too, had changed. Inspired by Phoenix, new programs were launched to protect animals and educate people about their care. His story continued to spread, reminding everyone who heard it that every life, no matter how small or broken, was precious. Hannah had become a quiet advocate for animal welfare, using her voice to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Hannah leaned back in her chair, cradling Phoenix in her arms. She thought about the person who had thrown him from the car that day, and for the first time, she didn't feel anger. Instead, she felt pity for someone so broken they couldn't see the beauty in a life as pure as Phoenix's. In the end, Phoenix wasn't just a survivor. He was a reminder that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that hope could be found in the unlikeliest places, and that second chances weren't just for those who gave them, they were for those brave enough to accept them. "Good night, my little warrior," Hannah said softly, pressing a kiss to his head as he drifted off to sleep. In his peaceful purrs, she found the kind of quiet joy that only comes from knowing you've made a difference, from knowing that love, pure, unwavering, and boundless, can change the world, one life at a time.